China Global Television Network.
Electoral officials in South Africa investigating claims of double voting. Citizens on the continent reflect on development achievements in Africa ahead of days set aside by the African Union. And concerns over the millions of people uprooted within their own countries due to conflict and violence. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, South African currency, the rand, remains steady as the ANC looks to stay in power. And we sample a music band making waves in the underground rock scene in Kenya. We begin in South Africa, where the country's Independent Electoral Commission is conducting an urgent audit to find out if double voting occurred in Wednesday's vote. This follows allegations from various political parties. There have also been claims that the indelible ink used can easily rub off, making it possible for people to vote twice. At least 4 people have been arrested in KwaZulu-Natal over the alleged claims. The Chief Electoral Officer, Sai Mamabolo, said the audit would cover a representative sample of voting stations, as well as stations where complaints and allegations of double voting were received.
The audit will cover a statistically representative sample of voting stations, as well as where complaints and allegations of double voting have been received. The final number and selection of the sample will be determined in conjunction with expert statisticians. The process was endorsed by the Party Liaison Committee this morning. The Electoral Commission has 7 days in which to announce the results of an election and is confident that this exercise will be completed in time to provide assurance of the integrity of the results within this period. The Electoral Commission is encouraged by the rapid arrest of 4 voters in KwaZulu-Natal in conjunction with the alleged double voting.
Well, for more on this, we are now joined live by CGTN's Angelo Coppola in Pretoria in South Africa for us. Angelo, doubts are being raised about the credibility of South Africa's election. What's the latest that you have from the probe into possible cases of double voting?
Karen, that number of 4 arrested people is now jumped to 20. We're not sure if there are any more arrests in the pipeline. That was confirmed late yesterday. In terms of the credibility of the elections, we haven't heard whether that auditing firm or the internal audit have been appointed yet and have actually started the audit of those troublesome areas that the Commissioner was talking about just now. So we're waiting to hear, first of all, whether an auditor has been commissioned, and secondly, if the audit's actually started. But it appears that there's going to be a challenge from another quarter. Late yesterday afternoon, about 10 of the smaller parties that contested the election out of those 48 parties actually staged a a demonstration, held a mini press conference here in the results centre, and they're claiming procedural concerns. They're planning to take the IEC to court around those missing ballots that they claim that have been seen on the streets, the vanishing ink that you mentioned just now, as well as that third issue around the double voting. So they're going to probably pursue this. We understand that the DA has said that they're distancing themselves from that legal challenge, but it doesn't. The parties, those 10 parties, were actually seen huddled in a corner this morning in a meeting, and we understand the leader of that grouping, Zwanele Manyi, is actually consulting with his lawyers. We do know that there's a senior court judge on the IEC Commission, so they'll take legal advice from the IEC side. But this battle is set to proceed, and the one word that sits within the Electoral Act is whether the legal challenge will have a material impact on the outcome of the actual elections. And there are only around 150 to 200,000 votes at stake here in those 10 parties, so the IEC will probably push ahead and declare, but they do have 7 days to do so, Karen.
So a few more developments there and possible legal challenges. When do you think the final tallies are likely to be, and what are the projections looking like at the moment?
Well, look, at the moment we have around 82% confirmed data in place. That's underway right now. It's 82%. That means that the numbers are in and they've been confirmed and verified. So that's around 18,000 of the 22,900 polling stations data is in hand. We expect 90% within the next sort of couple of hours. When the IEC does decide to declare, kind of depends on that legal challenge I mentioned earlier, but there does look like a voter turnout of around 65.5%, which is marginally lower than 2014. We see the ANC at around 57.7% right now nationally, followed by the DA at about 27.2% and the EFF at around 10.1%. So those are the figures as they stand now. They're likely to stay at that level for the remainder of the day. But the two big stories were the EFF gaining a significant 4% on their 2014 showing, and the Freedom Front taking a couple of 100,000 votes away from the DA because of their position on land. So those are the big stories at the moment. When they're going to declare, we're not sure just yet, but we'll probably hear later this afternoon. Karen?
Okay, thank you very much for that update on South Africa's elections. That was CGTN's Angelo Coppola there, live in Pretoria in South Africa for us. Moving on to other news, Africa's development achievements are celebrated in May. Various events are held throughout the month leading up to the 25th, the day set aside by the African Union to celebrate these achievements. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoe spoke to citizens from several countries to find out what they think has changed on the African continent.
The African voice, African narrative, the African story. These are phrases used to show how the continent is moving forward and what direction it wants to go in. At the African Union Commission in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, each of these portraits from the member states strives to reflect that African story. And many citizens who visit the AU Commission have seen for themselves the amount of development that has taken place across Africa.
I like that in Africa, technologies, especially mobile phones, are doing quite well. So that should continue. And the government should not bog online access to technologies. And again, Uganda is a culprit here.
The emerging of digital era is changing that by empowering each and every citizen to become the owners of their own stories. We are getting dependent, less and less dependent on international big corporate media to tell our stories. This is one very big progress that we need to celebrate during this month of May. But that's not to distract us from what is left to be done. We need to completely be in charge of telling our stories.
But despite advantages, there are still challenges like malnutrition, illiteracy, economic dependency, and high poverty levels. These plus political interference in development policies have often cast a shadow over the continent.
If you are not cautiously designing how you can implement, do things properly, you may end up in falling like debt trap, or at the end of the day, which is going to be indirect colonization, as we have seen in some countries already. Some big infrastructures are now being taken over by foreigners because these countries didn't manage to pay their debts on time.
If there is gold underneath and you don't have the mind to extract it, is the gold going to develop your country for you? No, nothing is going to happen. So we need to develop our mindset as well, have good, better and proper education to be able to develop our continent.
Some citizens suggest regional blocs will help add value to the continent of Africa.
If we integrate Africa right now, all the resource, a continent which have about 60 up to 68% of world industrial resource, if we can produce something integrating either continentally, we can do more. Other countries are seeing more investment on that. We have human resource that we can use. We can use that resource, young resource, to uplift our continent as a whole.
And ensuring peace is restored across the continent is another major hope for the future. The AU Peace and Security Council aims to iron out all the existing conflicts through diplomacy. Despite the challenges here in Ethiopia and across Africa, countries are celebrating the achievements of the continent through a series of month-long events. These are designed to reflect on the successes of the continent as well as promote the African brand. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And here are more views on this from citizens of Tanzania and South Africa.
To be an African is to live like an African man or woman by dressing like an African, eating like an African, communicating like an African, use African norms and tradition which are good to our society. So to me, to be an African goes beyond to be born in Africa.
To me, being African is our way of life, our culture, the way we come together in terms of when it's a time of need, when it's time to rejoice. To me, that's African.
Being African means being able to enjoy the richness and diversification in culture and the traditions that we have, enjoying the local prepared meals and the way of life, the love on the streets that we experience around here, and the hospitality you come around when meeting everyone.
What makes me African is the different cultures, the way that we live, the freedom to speak, to do anything, the history that the country holds. Makes you very proud of Madiba as well, the things that he achieved for us, to be able to love the way that we love and do the things that we do, and to do it freely and not be restricted with many things.
In Africa, we all love as one, even though we're all not considered as one. And you get all the different races, like your black, white, Indian, all the different kind of stuff. Like on the form, usually we have to fill in, we have to pick, on a form we have to pick white, colored, black or Indian. I would always pick or make my own block, and I would write African, because I feel that no matter what color you are, you're African because you were born in Africa.
I feel African just because it's just all about the culture and the diversity within this country. You know, you can, especially here in Cape Town, I feel that I've been living here for a while, and you just meet so many different people with so many different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds. Just to have a talk to them, you know, they're so friendly down here in Cape Town. They're always open to speaking about their culture and their heritage. I actually feel very honored to be African.
Moving on to other news now, the devastation caused by Cyclone Kenneth in Mozambique is getting worse by the day as major international relief agencies call for more funding. Over 200,000 Mozambicans have been affected and remain without access to food, proper shelter and clean drinking water. Our reporter Daniel Arap-Moy is in the Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique and brings us more.
Aid agencies are calling on the international community to assist communities affected by Cyclone Kenneth in Mozambique. The agencies say they need increased funding and logistical aid for thousands of people affected by the cyclone. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says only 30% of the $282 million required in Mozambique has been met, leaving a funding gap of 70%. The UN body is not alone. Many other international disaster response organizations are struggling to respond to the crisis in Mozambique due to lack of funding.
We are currently facing challenge with funds because we are also responding to the Idai cyclone, and we also have now the Kenneth cyclone. So this is just to say that UNICEF is stretched in terms of funds availability. We have a huge funding gap.
According to government estimates, Cyclone Kenneth affected more than 200,000 people, destroying homes and damaging food crops.
Much more needs to be done, and us together with the Mozambican Red Cross and the International Federation of the Red Cross is trying to meet the most urgent needs, and what we need is more help, more financial needs so that we can help those who've been left with nothing.
Mozambique is one of the world's most vulnerable countries to natural disasters and climate change. Tropical storms and cyclones are irregular occurrences.
Weeks after Cyclone Kenneth destroyed the province of Cabo Delgado, life remains a long way from normal. People here have no money and no groceries. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Cabo Delgado province, Mozambique.
Meanwhile, the Tanzania Meteorological Agency is warning of extreme weather conditions for people living in the east and the south of the country. Seasonal rains, known as masika rains, are expected to be accompanied by stronger winds and heavier rainfall than normal. The country was hit by heavy rains and strong winds from Cyclone Kenneth last month. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
Tanzania's seasonal rains, known as masika rains, are hitting the country with a vengeance. Delayed due to Cyclone Kenneth affecting the rainfall patterns in the area, this seasonal downfall is heavier than usual. Asha Mwajuma is a food vendor in Msasani Market. She says poor water management systems mean she's losing business.
Before the rains, I used to cook 10 kilos, and now with the rains, I only cook 3 kilos, and even those don't get finished. So that means I'm losing money.
Tanzania's meteorological agency believes the rains may cause severe flooding. It's expected the period of stronger rainfall than usual will last for 4 days.
The rainfall system were disturbed by those tropical cyclones, but now the tropical cyclones are no longer there. So the system has come on its own normal situation. That's why now we're having those rains.
The government has asked people living in areas that are prone to floods to leave before disaster strikes. It's also warning citizens not to rely on old infrastructure such as bridges and roads, saying the infrastructures might collapse due to the heavy rainfall and cause casualties. Weather experts say that even after the next few days of heavy downfall, seasonal rains are expected to continue further for another 2 or 3 weeks. So many Tanzanians are worried about how the country's infrastructure will cope. They fear flooding as well as destruction of their property. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Well, we're going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including we update you on the China-US trade talks in Washington. And concerns over the millions of people uprooted within their own countries due to conflict and violence.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Chinese Vice Premier Liu He is in Washington for the 11th round of high-level economic and trade consultations with the United States. Liu told reporters upon his arrival on Thursday that levying additional tariffs is not the way to solve trade problems.
I came here in good faith and sincerity.
Under the current circumstances, we hope to exchange views with our U.S. counterparts in a rational, candid manner. China believes additional tariffs is not the way to solve the problem. It would be bad for China, bad for the U.S., and bad for the world. China wants to solve the problem in a principled manner. Cooperation is the only way out. I came here under pressure. I came because we want to show our utmost sincerity and good faith. I am hopeful that we can resolve our differences in a candid, confident, rational manner.
Vice Premier Liu, some people on the U.S. side said if no deal is reached this time around, the Chinese economy will be hit harder than the U.S. economy. Any comment?
Like I said, additional tariffs are bad for both sides. To a large extent, the Chinese economy and the U.S. economy make up the global supply chain. Everyone will be hurt. Now, we do have some problems in our trade negotiations, but we shouldn't make ordinary people on both sides the collateral damage. That's regrettable. I hope we can find an optimal way to resolve this issue.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry echoed the Vice Premier's comments earlier today. A spokesperson said China-US trade issues were a global concern and the two sides had to find a way forward.
It's in the interests of both the US and China that there's a healthy and stable relationship. And the international communities hope so too. We hope this is something the US can work with China to achieve.
To other news now, millions of people were uprooted last year due to conflict and violence. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Centre, 2/3 of those displaced came from 10 countries, including Syria, Colombia and Somalia. Internally displaced people cannot claim international protection and often have less access to aid and medical care. Cities increasingly bear the burden of hosting IDPs. Conflict in the DRC, as well as rising tensions in Ethiopia, Cameroon and Nigeria, was cited in the IDMC report as triggering major displacements in 2018. Well, for more on the issue of IDPs in Ethiopia and Nigeria, we are now joined by Giram Chala in Addis Ababa and Deji Badmus, who is in Lagos for us. Giram, to you first. Ethiopia has been dealing with a large number of displaced people. What has triggered this and how is the government addressing the issue? Oh, I'm terribly sorry. We have lost Giram. Let's go to Deji first. Deji, who is in Lagos in Nigeria. Deji, the Boko Haram insurgency has largely contributed to displacements witnessed in Nigeria. What is the current situation and how are those displaced being helped to rebuild their lives?
Well, Karen, the situation, of course, is quite pathetic, and the issue actually came up when the UN General Assembly President actually visited Nigeria just a few days ago. The President brought up that issue, that the situation of the internally displaced persons is quite pathetic, and we know that the number of displaced is put at about 1.9 million people, and of that number, majority of them are children. The President did say during that meeting that most of those children do not know their parents at all. And but what the government has actually done is to set up just a few, I think 2 days ago, it set up a committee a commission now known as the Northeast Development Commission. Now that Northeast Development Commission is basically charged with the responsibility of rehabilitating the Northeast, reconstructing destroyed homes, and especially helping the internally displaced persons now to basically go back to their homes and go back to their normal lives. And of course, the head of that commission actually said that the first thing that the commission would do would be to concentrate on the IDPs. So, of course, the government gave the commission just around $28 million, which of course is quite small. It's difficult to see how much that commission now would do with that amount of money. But, the government is still trying to get help now from the international community to ensure that these internally displaced people are well taken care of. But the most important thing for the government at the moment is to try and get them back to their communities, ensure those communities are safe so that they can return and resume their normal lives. The majority of them are farmers. Unfortunately, because of the Boko Haram insurgency, they've not been able to farm for close to 9 years now. So it's a priority for the government, but funding too is a very key issue. The government hasn't got the kind of funds you would need now to take care of these people. The good thing is that the UN is helping. The UNHCR has actually budgeted around $800 million to take care of the IDPs this year. But the most important thing is these are just budgets. The most important thing is for the monies to actually come in so that things can actually change on the ground.
Okay, thank you, Deji. We will return to you in a minute. We do have Giram Chawla in Addis Ababa for us. Giram, Ethiopia has been dealing with a large number of displaced people. What has triggered this, and how is the government addressing this issue, would you say?
So far as we know, drought, flooding and ethnic-based violence are to blame for most of the internally displaced people's numbers in this country. And as we know, there are about 2.3, 2.5 million people internally displaced in this country. The government yesterday has confirmed that out of that number, 875,000 of them have been returned to their localities. But then again, 70% of the number that we are talking about here, of the number of IDPs in Ethiopia, they account for the conflicts that are happening across the country. This ethnic-based violences or border-related conflicts in this federal state are always reasons for people to fight and then people also to leave their localities. So as we know, the government is also trying to address these problems at the moment. One of the ways of addressing the problems is, maintaining rule of law and also apprehending people who are behind the conflicts, triggering them, displacing people at the same time. The government said more than 2,000 people have been identified as suspects of conflicts across the country, and from those 1,300 people have been apprehended by police and are now facing justice at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Giram. We are going to return to Deji now in Lagos for us. The issue of security is key in encouraging people to go back to their previous homes. What is the government doing to facilitate this, would you say?
Well, there's no question at all that the issue of security still remains a very huge challenge, and that Boko Haram is still active, sort of, in the northeast of the country. Of course, the military has liberated a lot of communities, but you still have a situation where Boko Haram comes out occasionally now to carry out hit-and-run attacks, and we've seen quite a couple of them in the past few weeks. So fact is that the people, it's actually the should I say, it's the wheel of the government now to ensure that these IDPs are returned to their homes, but there's still no guarantee that their homes, those places where they're left are actually safe, because we still see Boko Haram coming out to carry attacks in some of those places. Now, part of the problem for the government is that, look, while the military liberates some of these communities, you do not have the presence of the police there. So what you need, and that's what security experts have always said, is that, look, you can't have the military stationed in all the communities that have been liberated. Because, once a community is liberated, what happens is that the military would have to move on. So you would need civil authority now in those communities to ensure that, there's order, and especially the police. But it's a huge challenge. It's not happening, and that's the reason why, the resettlement of people back to their communities, it's a very slow process. Of course, quite a number of people have actually been resettled to their communities, but you still have these huge numbers that are yet to go back to their communities, and they are not willing to go back, as a matter of fact, because they fear that these communities are not safe. So it's an ongoing process. The government is doing everything it can to ensure that that happens, and it's one of the reasons why the Northeast Development Commission has been set up. But obviously, it's not something that will happen very, very fast. It's going to be a slow process, and it's definitely going to take time.
Okay, thank you, Deji. We are now returning to Giram in Addis Ababa for us. Now, the theme for the African Union this year is centred around refugees, returnees and the internally displaced. What's been the impact of this focus on the continent?
Well, people being displaced in their own countries is a global worry. And for Africa, it's a huge headache. From Somalia, Ethiopia, as Deji was saying, in Nigeria and other parts of the continent, it's really a huge factor for the African Union to address as soon as possible. The AU, as you've said, has come up with a...
Oh dear, we have lost Giram Chala there. Terribly sorry. We earlier spoke to Deji Badmus in Lagos, and of course that was Giram in Addis Ababa. Moving on to other news now. A high-level United Nations delegation led by the Special Representative of the Secretary-General for South Sudan has been trying to inject fresh momentum into the country's peace process. The team was in Capoeira earlier this week, a town largely deserted because of the prolonged conflict and the dire humanitarian situation there.
The delegation travelled to Capoeira to support reconciliation and peace-building activities in line with the revitalised peace agreement signed 8 months ago. Representatives from all parties attended the peace meeting, including the South Sudan People's Defence Forces, the Sudan's People Liberation Army in the opposition, and the South Sudan Opposition Alliance, as well as civil society and religious leaders.
Capoeira is one place right across the whole country where this sort of meeting is going on. And for me, it's so encouraging to see people everywhere saying to their leadership, we want peace, we want to see prosperity. With peace comes prosperity, prosperity brings jobs, economic development.
Confidence building on the ground is vital to the implementation of the peace agreement in local communities.
Bringing the two parties together, particularly the IO field commanders and the organized forces in the government side together and be able to exchange and dialogues. This will ease the communication and the understanding and build the confidence as the workshop entails.
The Joint Military Ceasefire Commission, composed of members of the government and opposition military forces, was also present. It monitors and verifies violations of the cessation of hostilities agreement.
To bring peace, you must compromise. But to maintain peace, it takes sacrifices. You have to sacrifice a lot as a leader. You have to sacrifice a lot as an officer. You have to sacrifice a lot as a citizen to make sure you maintain that peace.
Capoeira has been calm and peaceful recently, despite the presence of troops from both warring parties. But the persisting food crisis and lack of water continues to be a problem and is preventing many from making the important decision to return home and rebuild their lives. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
The Prime Minister of Cameroon, Joseph Ngute, has visited the Anglophone flashpoint city of Bamenda, sparking an angry protest from women demanding an end to the violence there. Protesters carried banners calling for peace in Bamenda, where English-speaking separatists have been battling what they say is discrimination from the country's French-speaking majority. Ngute began a one-week visit to the conflict-hit northwest and southwest regions, hoping to find a political solution to the escalating violence and humanitarian crisis. The visit comes less than a week after the UN warned that the crisis was getting out of hand. An estimated 2,000 people have been killed in the conflict over the past 3 years. Ethiopian authorities say conflicts around the country have so far caused the displacement of more than 2 million people. Nearly 900,000 of those displaced have since returned to their homes. The government has also apprehended 1,300 people linked with causing conflicts and displacement in the country. CGTN's Giram Chala has more.
Since before the new Ethiopian administration under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, and over the last almost a year, millions have been displaced from their homes due to ethnic-based conflicts. And of the more than 2 million IDPs, the government said almost 900,000 people have been returned to their localities.
The figures that we've received and effective as of May 7, 2019, is that there's 875,000 that have been returned to their original residences. And these figures may shift. That's why I'm giving it a cutoff of May 7, because this is happening in real time. And as the efforts are being continued to reinstate people back into their locals and their communities, there's going to be an increase in terms of the number.
But Ethiopia still has a serious homework to do when it comes to returning the remaining over 1.5 million people to their homes and quell ethnic-based violence in the country. The government said there is a progress in its efforts of achieving the rule of law.
Since some of these conflicts have broken out over the past few months, we have identified at the federal level about 2,517 suspects in various regions. And out of this 2,517 suspects, up to 1,300 have been reprimanded and are following the due process, the due legal process.
Ethiopia's government generally blames spoilers for being behind the conflicts witnessed in parts of the country. IDPs and their camps are said to be used as human shields and hiding place for spoilers. But with all said and done, the government is confident Ethiopia will slowly but surely return to its absolute peace. Grumjara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
All the business news coming up for you after the break, including South African currency, the rand, remains steady as the ANC looks set to stay in power. And we'll bring you a clearer understanding of what Kenya's new data collection exercise means.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Africa's rand was mostly unchanged in early trade on Friday. At 6:38 GMT, the rand traded at 14.3200 per dollar, which is 0.17% firmer than its New York close on Thursday. According to NKC African Economics, the rand is expected to trade in the range of 14.25 to 14.40 rand to the dollar. It's a steady performance as investors watch who will become South Africa's next president. Vote counting shows the ruling African National Congress is holding a commanding lead. The ANC is set to retain power after Wednesday's general election, but the party is also on course for its worst performance in a national poll in its 25 years in power. In Tanzania, talks between gold mining company Acacia Mining and the government have taken an unexpected turn. Mark Bristow, who is the CEO of the firm's parent company, Barrick Gold, says Acacia is not cooperating. The Tanzanian government has accused Acacia of evading taxes for years by underdeclaring exports and was hit with a $190 billion tax bill. Acacia had already been in discussion with Tanzania's government in June 2017 when Barrick intervened, but Acacia's interim CEO, Peter Galetta, has hit back, saying the company is engaging constructively with local, regional and national governments. The Tanzanian government says it still hopes to secure a deal with Acacia, despite reports indicating otherwise. Stakeholders in Kenya's technology sector have raised concerns about the use of data collected in the ongoing digital registration exercise. The government launched the 45-day process to get personal details of citizens and foreigners in one database. Tech experts, however, say in the absence of a data protection law, the information could be misused. Wilkista Niabwa has the story.
At an administrative office in Nairobi, dozens line up, their identification documents in hand. This is the last week of registration for the National Integrated Identity Management System number in Kenya. Through the system, the government intends to collect individuals' personal information, such as biometric data like fingerprints, into one database. The aim, authorities say, is to enhance security, and Kenyans are rushing to meet the deadline.
It's a good thing because they will put out information together. We'll have one identification document which will be easier to carry around in our wallets.
But Kenya's technology service providers harbor doubts about the safety of such information. In the last week, technology company Mozilla brought together government officials and IT stakeholders to discuss data protection and management. Kenya is yet to enact a data protection law, and without it, fears abound that the data collected could be abused.
We are also concerned how is it going to be stored? Because someone can just manipulate this particular data and use it against you. For example, you have to give details of the name of your spouse, your kids.
The concern here is, while we're collecting all of this data, we are not being told who is going to be storing it, where it's being stored, why it's being collected, why we need all of this really sensitive information, what are the security measures, to ensure that that it's not hacked. And the most concerning issue is that we are centralizing this data in one central place, meaning that it becomes a honeypot for any malicious actor to access.
Technology experts argue that only once the law is in place can the government guarantee the security of the data it holds. But there are 45 million people to register in 45 days, and the clock is ticking. And with just 8 days left to register, Kenyans are racing to get listed in the National Digital Register. Wilkista Niabwa, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Tunisia has attracted more tourists in the first quarter of this year, which saw a 17.4% increase in arrivals compared to the same period in 2018. The sector saw an influx of up to $262 million of hard currency revenues. Here's CGTN's Wilkista Niabwa again with more on that story.
As the summer season sets in, the Tourism Ministry welcomes increasing numbers of visitors and wants to take them beyond the beach.
In regards to Tunisia, there is a huge progression. Almost all of the main tour operators that are used to Tunisia tell us that there is an average increase of 30% on bookings for Tunisia.
Tourism numbers had been dented by deadly attacks in 2015. Gunmen killed 21 foreigners and a Tunisian security guard at the Bardo National Museum. It was followed by a shooting rampage at Sousse Beach Resort, which left 38 people dead. Most of them were British tourists.
A bad environment can cause damage around cities and touristic areas, and it will scare away tourists. It's like when there's a terrorist attack, it's the same.
L'objectif d'1 million cette année en 2019 peuvent l'atteindre.
Several countries, including France, have eased travel warnings to Tunisia. 2 million holiday makers have visited this year, an increase of 24% compared to the year before.
The French market ended up at 1.4 million in 2010. It was 800,000 in 2018. We are very far from our full capacity to welcome French tourists, and I think we can reach 1 million tourists this year in 2019.
The indebted industry is heavily reliant on cheap, all-inclusive holidays. The sector also aims to attract visitors who want to participate in activities away from the beach during the winter season.
We're interested in exploring alternative tourism, but not during the high season. For the reason that during winter, hotels at the beach become empty. We have to make the most out of this period between the 1st of November until the 31st of March. We have a lack of tourists during this month.
The tourism sector accounts for 7% of the GDP, and the government hopes to bump that number up with a record 9 million visitors this year. Wilkis Anyabo, CGTN.
Sudanese Rapid Support Forces have seized 241 kilograms of gold from a plane that landed in the capital Khartoum in an investigation into possible smuggling. The plane had departed from Nile River State. According to RFS, only 93 of the 241 kilograms had been cleared for export. The status of the remaining quantity is still unclear. Sudanese authorities have, however, not mentioned the Moroccan company exporting the gold, despite acknowledging that the company is legally registered to operate in Sudan.
And in an operation in the Nile River State, after trying to leave the country and smuggle out its resources, a large amount of gold of around 241 kilograms has been seized. The manufacturing company is a Moroccan investment company. 93 kilograms of that amount was supposed to arrive yesterday in order to be exported abroad. Our duty is to deliver the necessary amount to its rightful owners in Sudan, as well as see through all legal measures in order to give justice to the owners.
Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including... We sample a music band making waves in the underground rock scene in Kenya.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Blues rock music is not a mainstream genre in Kenya. However, it is slowly gaining a cult following. The band Refuge has one of the youngest band members in East Africa. Since its inception in 2016, the band has been making waves in the underground rock scene of the region. Let's find out about their musical journey.
I'm Silas. I'm Gabe. And I'm 14. I'm 15. Yeah, he's the eldest. I'm 14. I'm the tallest in the band. Second tallest. Sure, second tallest.
Well, we're a blues rock, classic rock band based here in Kenya. And we love to play many genres such as blues, classic rock, and also many other things such as folk and a bit of country.
Well, it's kind of a common musical interest for all of us. We like that kind of old 60s, 70s music. And I think what we're trying to do essentially is we're trying to create like a resurgence of that kind of classic rock blues. Yeah.
I think it's just the type of music that all of us grew up listening to, with our parents just playing it around the house, so we kind of caught on.
Patrick and I are siblings, right? So we basically grown up listening to the same kind of music. At first, say I didn't really care much about music, but once I joined Refuge, I really felt a connection with the music like Patrick and the rest of the band members did.
our idea of if you just like having
we're our own band, kind of like.
Yeah, they're not.
It's kind of different from like every music.
We have like a wide range of music, so like very versatile. Like our age, I guess, is like unique, but we don't like to be seen as the kid band.
We never really liked the pop music for our age because everyone was listening to it, everyone conformed kind of to, we're just gonna eventually listen to what everyone else listens to. And I don't think there's much authenticity in that music. It's not full of feel, which blues, rock, and all those other genres I named are really full of feel.
We're all very like talented when it comes to blues, I would say.
It's more fun. It's the most fun like genre to play for us because it's a lot of head from.
We work well with blues, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, and there's a lot of energy as well, so it's always fun to play blues.
Well, I think we call ourselves a Kenyan band, not necessarily because of our nationalities, but where we originated. Because I think if it wasn't for Kenya, we maybe wouldn't have the same kind of feel, the same kind of aspiration.
Influences as well.
Yeah.
Me personally, I am from Kenya, but the rest of us, I think, even those most of us aren't from Kenya, we might just call it home.
Myself, I've lived in Kenya for 12 years, and so I feel like, essentially, I'm kind of Kenyan, I don't know.
If we were to move from Kenya, we'd always still like have a bit of Kenya, like that we take.
It's true.
So Kenya's like.
You say it's where we grew up.
Yeah.
Least favourite subject, definitely maths. Just tricky.
Math.
World civilizations.
That's easy. Science. I do not like science.
That's a given.
It's always music, because I don't necessarily like being told what to play.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including